The mass of shitbirds dove as one. It was eerie how quiet they were. Like the night sky was falling in on us without a singular whimper to mark its fall. A perfect, deadly silence. They moved like owls swooping in on mice. "All right, you cocksuckers," I said under my breath, not feeling an ounce of bravado in my chest. I silently made peace with the fact I was about to die. Let's get this shit over with. Grook was taking a different approach from my resignation to death. She roared with full-fanged defiance up at the horde. She brought up her AR pistol and started to put rounds at the range. Valkyrie shuddered every time she hit a target. .458 SOCOM, the round her custom AR pistol was chambered in, was designed to fix a problem of 5.56's ability to drop targets quickly. It's a common thing to hit a person multiple times with 5.56s before they figure out they don't want to be in a gunfight with you no more. Whereas the 5.56 is a suggestion, the .458 is more like a one-word come-to-Jesus talk. Fucking bullets that would take the can-do attitude out of a Kodiak bear. Main drawback is the magazines tend to be a bit rather limited capacity. The shipbirds looked sleek when they dove, their massive wings folded back behind them. Some had their arms outstretched, claws flexed. Looked like a pack of damn fever demons reaching down for our souls. However, when one of them took one of the massive rounds, they would flare out in an explosion of feathers and black blood. The ones who still possessed the ability to scream let out ear-piercing caterwaul as they fell out of the sky, like wrecked Messerschmitts over the English Channel. Me and Dollywall took our cue from the boss, and opened fire as well. 10mm and .45 ACP aren't exactly calibers known for being soft on a body, but our pistols just weren't making quite the same impact on the shitbirds. It took more rounds to knock divers out of the sky. Hell, if anything, more seemed to be shifting their way towards us and away from the makeshift anti-aircraft gun that Grook's pistol was. Dollywell held his ground, roaring like a proud Rakshashan he was, firing into the shitbirds as quick as he could. It was a good shot, but not the best. Not that it made the difference as tightly packed as our aggressors were. Hell, a punt gun would have come in handy right about then. I mean, if someone made one in the last 100 years or so, of course. The shitbirds had speed, but they weren't exactly falcons. So we had a few brief moments to drop some of them out of the sky before they were on us. We did what we could with our pistols, but it was never going to be enough. That just wasn't in the cards for us. Lavanda's AR pistol went dry just as the skyborn buttholes reached us. She didn't bother reaching for the fresh magazine. She hauled back and threw the 10-pound pistol as hard as she could, tagging one of the shitbirds square in the beak. That was probably about the last thing the shitbird was expecting, and it went wild as the flying pistol smashed its beak back through its face. It lost all of its bird of prey ferocity. His out-of-control body smashed into a few of his pals. His wings tangled with that of his fellow shitbirds, throwing a few of them off course and creating a spot in the chaos in the sky above us. Grook dropped down into a fighting stance, her stun baton at the ready, and waited for the wave of shitbirds to land on her. It didn't take long before they obliged her, a pile of feathery bodies rolling over her. Blue flashes of light lit the fray as she went off with this stun gun, giving off a strobe effect. Each zap hopefully meant a country-fried shitbird, but you couldn't really tell in all that chaos. It was all screeches of anger, grunts of pain, and orcish battle cries. It was hard to tell who was making the noise. It was just an ear-splitting melange of sound. Now, let me tell you, I would have loved nothing more than to stroll over and give her a hand. However, I was busy at that moment. I was balls deep in my own set of problems at that particular point. The sons of bitches were on me and Dollywall too. A rolling black mass of anger, blazing white eyes, and slashing talons fell out of the sky on us. One of the feathery fucks was diving for me before he knew my name. And apparently, I just happened to look a lot like a guy who must have fucked his girlfriend. I didn't give him a chance to work through his issues on me, though. I put my front sight post between his eyes and yanked the Glock's bang lever. The 10mm fuck-off smashed its way through the spot between his left eye. Not where it was aiming, but good enough for government work. The shipbird's head snapped back and its body followed it, sending him into a sort of backwards airborne somersault. The creature's momentum carried it forwards towards me. I managed to get out of the way before I was set upon by another of the bird's monster pals. I got the air knocked out of me as the fucking thing trucked me, knocked me over for a loop. But I had enough adrenaline in my veins to keep me in the fight. Felt like I took a sledgehammer square in the body armor, though. I didn't have time to pay it any mind. The knife's magic was working overtime, and that let me ignore the pain for a moment. I could still feel it, of course, like I could feel the jagged bits of my broken rib rubbing against each other. A bizarre feeling and an unwelcome one, to be sure. Me and the shitbird who just used me as a landing pad rolled across the ground, slashing and tearing at each other. I had him on weight, but something mystical backed up the scrawny little muscles, and he managed to get a mount on me. Fucker was stronger than he looked, but I managed to get my arms up between us in the guard. I felt the welts and bruises raise my flesh as he went wild, swinging at my forearms. I would learn later that he'd give me a whole new set of stress fractures. I still had a hold of my pistol and my knife. Lord knows how I hadn't managed to stick myself with it in that rolling around. But I still had a hold of them, and that's what mattered. The Valkyrie seemed to have a flair for the dramatic. He demonstrated this by raising his arms and flaring his wings out to illustrate their fullest span. His head fell back and he did his best to roar into the night sky. It came out more of as a overly aggressive angry screech, but he got his point across. "Enough with the fucking theatrics," I said, lifting the Glock to his face. I tensed up on the trigger and with a whimperless bang I sent him to the land of wind and ghosts. He fell back, leaving a trail of pink mist in his wake, his corpse twitching where it lay across my legs. I kicked the feathery carcass off of me. I didn't spare much of a thought afterwards. I had bigger issues at hand. His fight was over, but mine was still a going concern. I pushed myself to my feet, with as much grace as I could muster, which wasn't much considering the ringing my bell had taken in the last 3 minutes or so. The knife might have had my pain levels dulled, but I was still feeling the after effects of getting a corpse dropped on me, not to mention the fight I had almost instantly gotten myself into. I caught sight of the miller's cattle gate, the one I had crossed less than an hour ago in much more peaceful conditions. It struck me that I had to be the closest to the cars on the other side of the gate, the cars with the radios we could use to get some backup out here, the backup that would probably keep us alive. And yes, that very Kronk-like thought pattern was exactly how it went through my mind. I put my head down and started hoofing it, but I didn't make it too far. As I got hit from the side again, I felt something dig into my body armor and scrape. It didn't penetrate, but it felt like somebody had hit me in the ribs with a baton and was making repeated follow-on strikes. Not a great feeling. I tumbled again, the cement truck that had bowled me over following me, slamming his hands at me like a chimpanzee going through heroin withdrawals. It was making solid hits too, but a mix of my body armor and the magic out of the knife let me ignore that for a time being. I lost my pistol somewhere in the tumble, but held on to my knife. I managed to grab a limb, not sure if it was an arm or a leg. I cranked it as hard as I could into the direction that didn't feel natural for it, and rolled my body weight to the side. I brought a confused shitbird with me. I felt something in the limb give way, because it went from rigid to floppy in a heartbeat. There was a surprised squawk of pain from somewhere in my vicinity. I realized that I wasn't seeing so great all of a sudden as my eyes were burning. No time to worry about it now. I dove at where the shriek sounded like it had come from. I realized I had something under me all of a sudden. I had a shitbird in an awkward but serviceable mount. It was struggling under me, trying to get loose. So I did what you do in these situations. I struck out with my knife. I heard another pain noise, so I kept hitting it with the business end of the knife until it stopped squirming, until it felt like a dead thing. I gave it a few more stabs for good measure. They were probably unnecessary, maybe even a little excessive, I admit, but hey, they felt good at the time. I leaned back, struggling to catch my breath. I remember hoping that didn't mean that my broken rib hadn't poked too many holes in my lung. I ran my hand over my eyes. My hand felt wet. However, I was able to see a little better, so I rubbed some more. I got more vision back in return. I blinked a few more times and looked at my hand. It was blood. I'd like to say I was covered in dead shitbird's blood, but it wasn't anything nearly that cool. Something had laid my forehead open pretty good. It was my blood. I'd like to say it was from a lucky slash thrown by a powerful enemy, but the fact of the matter was, I had probably done it with the knife when I was rolling around with the shitbird. I had no idea when I did that to myself. My body was pretty battered at this point. Picking out when one bit started hurting in particular would have been tall order. Open wounds were a lot of things to worry about in their own right, but there was no telling what sort of supernatural blood-borne pathogens lived in shitbird blood. No telling if I'd already gotten some in my forehead wound. There was no telling if I'd be around long enough for it to matter. Nothing to do it, but get on with my original goal. I pushed myself to my feet again. The world was chaos around me. I'd been lucky to deal with only 2 shitbirds. Dollywall was fighting an Irish Catholic family's worth of them. And I couldn't make hide nor hair of Grook under the wiggling pile of feathery bodies she was fighting. But I knew she was still up and swinging, because occasionally a broken body would come flying out of the fray. They seemed to be going after the heavier hitters, which was probably for the best. They could hold their own a lot better than I could. Nevertheless, I felt a pang of guilt run through me as I had to turn my back on them. The best way to help them was to get my patroller and call for help. It was the right move to take. It was a smart move to take. I told myself all sorts of things like that. Didn't feel any less like I was abandoning them, though. I was almost at the gate when 3 more shitbirds touched down in front of me. They flared their wings as they landed. I would have given them more cool points if they had done the superhero landing. These things looked fresh for a fight. They didn't scream or squawk like their flock mates. They just looked at me, with ferociously cold white eyes. They looked switched the fuck on. Well, shit, I muttered. I got a feeling like I was staring at my own death come to claim me. I briefly wondered if these guys had been detailed to make sure nobody got to the cars, but quickly realized that didn't immediately matter. Now, I know I just told you a story of holding my own against 2 other shitbirds and succeeding, but those were just one-on-one dust-ups, and I cannot convey to you how much both of those fights had kicked my ass. I mean, I did have a lot more blood inside my body at the beginning of those fights than I did now. This might just be a 3-way execution looking for a participant. Not that I in any way wanted that particular participation trophy. I wasn't really looking to find out how to do this either. To quote the great Texan poet, Ron White, I didn't know how many of them it would take to kick my ass, but I knew how many they had. I was broken, battered, and one hard fart from beaten down. I'd lost my Glock and most of my go. My tank was empty. But I was not about to just curl up and die. No, sir. I was about to die like an idiot, swinging out of my weight class with stained boxer briefs. Not that I had a choice, mind you. I screwed up everything I had left in me and ran straight at the one in the middle. I bum rushed straight into the shitbird. His buddies jumped back a step or 2, squawking as they went. I guess in their minds it was supposed to be easy. Just mop up the wounded stragglers squirting for the gate. I wasn't supposed to fight back, I guess. That's pretty normal for creatures that are used to inducing fear. Hell, most of them aren't actually that powerful. Just hard to look at. I ran into a ghoul for trespassing one time. He was hanging around out back of a local morgue, looking for scraps, I suspect. Now, see, ghouls get a bad rap. Most of them are normal people, just terrifying to look at. But they're like any other group of people. Some are assholes, most aren't. Now, when I pulled on the scene with this particular ghoul rooting through the Doc Guru's medical waste cans, I knew it was just a hard-up creature who was looking for a meal. I'm not soulless. I would have been fully willing to go down a striper for this guy. But he was new in town and tried to intimidate me into fucking off. He didn't know me, so he didn't know how much that wasn't going to work. He huffed and puffed and blustered. I ignored that, walked right up to him and put him in zip ties. He offered almost no resistance and was generally confused as to why I wasn't running in terror. I stopped at Earl's and got him a box of steak fingers on the way to book him in. He cried and thanked me as he ate his meal in the back seat. Life's hard all over. It's even harder when you're terrifying to the untrained eye. Oh, in case you're curious, I reached out to our chief mortician, Dr. Guru. I ended up getting the ghoul a job sweeping floors at the morgue. Turned out he had a real knack for working with dead people. I don't mean that as a joke either. He just got a bachelor's degree in mortuary sciences from Lamar's online college. I'm really proud of that kid. His name is Brian. But anyway, back to the fight at hand. I wrapped my arms around the shitbird, getting a good bear hug on him. I pressed my face into his chest, and was rewarded with one of the most ungodly smells I'd ever olfactoried in my life. The bird monster smelled like old death and an older birdcage. And I ignored the smell and started jamming my knife into its side and back. I felt rib bones break as a small crossguard of the enchanted Kabar hit its flesh, signifying that the blade was buried in the monster about as far as it would go. I drew back and stabbed again and again. Every time I tore the knife out of the bird, there was a small geyser of blood and shredded flesh. Warm blood hit my face. I ignored it. I pulled the knife out of the bird for a final time, wrenching it down as I pulled. As if finally realizing that he had just been granted a bunch of new speed holes, the bird let out a sound that I would only describe as unnatural, even for a bird monster that was born in the soulless pit of misery somewhere, like Oklahoma or something. I felt something hit me across the back like a baseball bat on a trash can in a Houston's Astro game. Go Stros. The bird on the right was making an attempt to save his buddy by throwing his arm into wild flailing slashes and haymakers. I was probably too close to catch his talons, but trust me, my spine and ribcage let me know he was putting some effort into it. I had to make it stop, or it'd end up beating me to death. So I squeezed the bird I was fighting as hard as I could. I jerked up with all my power my battered body could muster. I shifted my weight and threw the bird monster in my arms towards the bird on the right. Not a sexy hip toss or anything, just throwing one object at another. They went down in a tangle of wings and limbs. Almost on reflex, I turned and sent the wild haymaker on the birds on my left. I caught him square between the eyes. My knuckles told me that I was going to regret that later, but the monster's reaction was worth it. The bird bounced back out of reach. It let out a confused squawk of pain. It stood there for a split second. Its bright white eyes somehow seemed to cross in pain. Its beak fell open, and it let out a noise of confused pain. It sounded like the damn thing said, "Ow." Even though I was closer to dead at this point than I'd been in the last hour at least, I still had to pause and let out a laugh at that. It's one of those things you would have to be there for, but trust me when I tell you it was fucking hilarious. But I guess that shitbird didn't appreciate my laughing at his pain. The thing shook the cobwebs out of its head, it rose into the air a couple of feet, the wings spread out at its sides. I suppose this particular Valkyrie was a Cobra Kai fan, cause it kicked me square in the fucking chest. And yes, it was a goddamn crane kick. Fucker must have ate his Wheaties that morning too. Because there was some serious ass behind that kick. I felt things go broken in my chest. Pain flared white in my eyes, which was a surprise to me. The knife was reaching its limits of what it could handle. What it could keep me from feeling. What it could keep from killing me. I dwelled on that for a split second. But the sound my head made as it bounced off the cattle gate when I landed distracted me from all of that. Sort of like a clang thump sort of sound. Real fucking sucked. I took quick stock of myself and realized I was in pretty bad shape. Chest felt like I was caved in. I was covered in blood. Head wasn't feeling so great either. Everything hurt. I still had my knife, but was losing the strength to keep a solid grip. I realized this was probably going to be about it for your favorite deputy. Another axiom of my father's came into mind. Boy, if you go down swinging. Okay, Dad, I said out loud to a man I was expecting to see soon, assuming we'd be in the same place, of course. Infer from that what you will. I looked down at the knife in my hand. It was so covered in gore and biological detritus that I couldn't even see the glow of the golden runes inlaid in the blade. But then again, my knife hand and forearm were covered in blood too. But like I said, there was blood all over everything. There was a lot of stuff flying around at that point. My uniform was a total write-off as well. I noticed that the tip of my knife had been snapped clean off in the kerfuffle. The remaining length of the blade looked pretty rough too. I wondered if that had an effect on the knife. Maybe it was mad at me for letting it get tore up. It didn't matter though. No one would have to see it in such poor shape anyway. That is, after they buried it with me, of course. My head lulled a bit as I looked at two shitbirds looming over me. The one I had stabbed must have not made it. Good, I remember thinking. Fuck that guy. One of them stepped closer. The thing squatted at my feet. It extended one of its talons. It was moving slowly, as if it was trying to make the moment as dramatic as possible, like it was trying to drag as much fear out of me as it could. The tip of its talon came to roost on the steel-toed tip of my black Bates combat boots. The creature's eyes bore into mine as it began tapping on the tip of my boot. Its beak fell open. It was fucking with me. It looked for all the world like it was trying to laugh at me, mock me, make me feel weak in my last moments. It briefly turned its head towards his buddy, like it was saying, "Terry, are you seeing this shit?" It never noticed when my hand went into my belt, so it was pretty surprised when it turned back towards me. In a stream of Bull's Heart Sheriff's Department special blend pepper spray, Mama Grook's special recipe, hit it right between the eyes. I emptied the little canister square into the shitbird's stupid shitbird face. The effect was pretty instantaneous. The shitbird's hands went scrambling to its eyes, something that could be described as an avian scream of pain ripped out of its beak, as it tried to get the pain out of its eyes. I remember hoping that it accidentally poked itself in the eye. "Don't fucks with me, buddy," I said around a raspy chuckle, half giddy from head trauma and blood loss. "I've been known to fucks back." The bird probably didn't understand why its face felt like it was melting. Took wing into the sky, still rubbing its face trying to get the spicy air out of his pores. He may not have been dead, but for now he was out of the picture. I'd count that as a W. I reached out to the cattle gate. I grabbed a bar in the middle and used it to pull myself back to my feet. It took a minute as my vision was all wibbly-wobbly, and it would have been easier to point out the parts of my body that didn't hurt, vice the opposite. The third Valkyrie must have been an intern or something, because he stood there looking very confused. All of a sudden being alone must have not been very comforting. I leaned on the gate. I stared at the intern for a minute. "That go like you thought it would, champ?" I asked the bird. "Did it?" I was breathing hard as I could taste my own blood in my mouth. The bird gotten over its disappearance of its friends and screwed up some courage, because it raised a handful of black talons to the sky. It was a beautiful Texas night sky, I realized. The stars were in fact big and bright, as good as a sky as any to die under, I suppose. The talons twitched open. It may as well have been a headman's axe. Time slowed for me. I watched the Valkyrie take that first step in my direction. I knew it was coming for me. The way it moved towards me told me everything I needed to know. I tried to push myself off the gate and assumed a defensive posture, but I was so damn tired and my whole body was so damn wrecked. "Here it comes," I remember thinking in that moment. And in that moment, I was ready to die. Not eager, mind you, but ready. I wouldn't go happily, and I damn sure didn't plan to go peacefully. But I had nothing left. I knew that I had done everything I could, and the effort I had was one worthy of a warrior. I had given far more than I had taken, and that's all one can ask for when it comes to the end. Lavonda Grook, however, wasn't ready for me to go off shift just yet, though. I was pretty surprised when it turned